Hello and welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with the Texas AD, Chris Del Conte, giving some very interesting thoughts during his town hall meeting. Then we will get into the college football playoff and ESPN going together for another extension for 6 years. We will then jump into some instant impact freshmen from where I'm sitting, and then we have win totals that came out. So make sure you stick around for that. We have win totals. I will go through every conference and give you two teams. One team that I like to hit their win total, one team that I don't like so much to hit their win total. Before we start, though, I would like to ask you to like and follow the show. Also, we get tons of requests for questions throughout the show, and the best way to get your question read on air is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's very helpful not only to us, but to you all who ask questions, so you can see your question on the screen and I can get to it as quickly as possible. So use that screen if you would like to leave a tip, but let's jump right in. Why don't we? The Texas AD, Chris Del Conte, had his town hall meeting, sort of a State of the Union for Texas athletics yesterday, and there were a couple of huge takeaways. And I think the number one takeaway for pretty much everyone watching was they will be working towards a 9-game schedule in the SEC moving forward. It seems like 2026 is the optimal start date for that. I think it's very interesting, partly because that will be the first year of a probably new playoff format, which there has been a lot of different ideas and things thrown out there for that, whether it's 6+6, whether it's 5+7, whether it's just no auto bids at all and entirely at large bids. The Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti has thrown out the idea of 16 teams, which is what the FCS does. So it'll be very interesting to see how those negotiations go, especially with this wrinkle added to it. Obviously, the SEC for the last couple of years has been an 8-game league. They've always been 8 conference games, and it's made things a little bit tough in terms of comparing a team from the SEC to a team from the Big Ten, because you play different level of competition for the most part. Teams like Georgia and Alabama, being able to face that fourth extra out of conference opponent, and for Georgia, playing Georgia Tech the last couple of years, it's been mostly a layup win. So I think it definitely does add to the gauntlet that is the SEC and has been the SEC for a long time, but also it does create a little bit more of a streamlined path in terms of deciding who's the better team between a SEC team and a Big 12 team or an ACC team. So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls. Also, a big thing of this is college football has been thinking about for a long time some type of uniform scheduling, whether that's across the board or in the Power Five or whatever. This has been an idea that's been kicked around a lot. It's one that I really like. I think uniform scheduling across the board, whether that's everyone plays 9 conference games and has to play only FBS opponents, whether that's you play 8 games and you have one FCS opponent on your schedule. Regardless, I think a huge step in the future of college football is going to be this uniform scheduling model. And what does that mean for college football fans, and especially what does it mean for teams outside of the SEC when the SEC can tout this 9-game schedule against the toughest conference in the country? Same with the Big Ten, where the Big 12 and the ACC are starting to lose steam in that conversation, really, in a lot of different ways. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of shakes up everything around the SEC, not only the SEC, but just to talk about the SEC a little bit, how this will affect teams coming in. I think, especially coming from the Texas AD, I think this holds a certain level of weight because there is this with Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league, I think they are new to these conversations, right? And so obviously, this 9 game SEC schedule has been something that has been kicked around a lot. It's something that Nick Saban even said he was very much in favor of during his time at Alabama, and he was never able to make it happen. But I think this could be finally the tipping point where you add Oklahoma and OU, or you add Oklahoma and Texas, excuse me, and you finally have 16 really quality teams, and you should be playing 9 game schedules. So it'll be interesting to see not only how the teams currently in the SEC and have been in the SEC for a long time adjust to that, but also a Texas team who will jump into the SEC and they'll play 8 conference games next year, and then 2 years down the road they'll have to add one more to the schedule. So I wonder if in 3 years Texas is looking back on this decision and thinking maybe we should have stuck at 8 games, but I think that's something they'll have to worry about for another day. I think one of the big downfalls, I suppose, of this current model is in a 12 team or a 16 team playoff, the at large bids are going to be a little bit harder to come by, especially with the 6+6 model they have going into 2024 and 5, where you have 6 conference champions and then 6 at large. That's only 6 teams that can take up those spaces. And I think when you see the difference between the SEC and the Big Ten, it's easy to say that all 6 of those spots or 5 of 6 of those spots should go to those conferences. But at the end of the day, if you have Ole Miss sitting there who has played, 9 conference games in 2026 and has gone through an absolute gauntlet, and maybe they're 9-3, maybe they're even 8-4, but there's a genuine argument to be made that they're a top 12, top 16, whatever that looks like down the road. They could very easily be a top 12, 16 team, even with 3 or 4 losses on the schedule. So I think it's something that we should definitely keep an eye out on, because not only does it make it, the uniform scheduling, I think overall is a very good thing, but it does create an interesting conversation in the college football playoff room where you have to decide how much better is the SEC than the ACC, how much better is the SEC than the Big 12, or maybe even the Big 10, who knows. So I think it creates something of a dilemma that could possibly squeeze out some ACC and some Big 12 teams throughout this process. But at the end of the day, I really love the uniform scheduling model. I think it is a huge, huge help to college football. I think it, at the very least, helps teams in the SEC. There are a number of teams in the SEC that play neutral site games. 4 of the big ones, obviously, Texas, OU, Georgia, and Florida. That's a built-in game every year that you are either the home or away team, which then takes a home or away game from the team the following year. Basically, the home and away games are never even for those teams. They're always leaning one direction because of that neutral site game, counting as a home or an away game depending on the year. And I think this will give a lot of stability to that idea, where you can have Texas OU as a neutral conference game and still have Texas and Oklahoma have 4 home games and 4 away games. So there's not this big variability in terms of sometimes. I think Georgia had 7 home games or 8 home games last year, something like that. And Texas going into this year will have 7, and then the following year will only have 3 currently on the schedule. So it does create for some issues in terms of a level playing field in terms of how many games you're playing home and away. There is a stability to being someone like Arkansas or even Alabama, where you don't have to play that conference neutral site game. So I think this helps a lot of different aspects of the SEC schedule that I've been a little bit not the biggest fan of necessarily. I think this gives everyone a very clear definition of what a FBS, what a Power 5 schedule is supposed to look like. And not only that, but it does create that ability for teams like Texas and OU and Georgia and Florida to keep those games alive, to keep them where they are, because that's where they should be, both those games, and still have the home and away games the way they like them, and not have them all over the place and not have to worry about, 1 year playing 7 and then the next year playing 4 home games, because that is a huge advantage or a huge disadvantage depending on which side of the coin you're on. So I think, although this is a big change for the SEC, and although there will be some people that will not be a huge fan of this because the SEC is the best conference, I really do love it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think at the end of the day, the college football playoff in whatever capacity that is in 2026 will have to make that decision of what is the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else. And they'll have to see, is a 9-3 USC better than an 11-1 Texas Tech or a 12-0 Texas Tech, God forbid. But I think there's a lot of interesting conversations that will happen in that room coming down the stretch, but still 2 years away from that. So still an 8-game schedule in the SEC right now, but tons to look forward to in the SEC come 2026. But some other interesting things that he dropped in there that would mainly be of interest to Texas fans, I won't lie to you, but I think there's, a little something for everyone. One of the main things is, as we all remember, when Texas and Texas A&M faced off, it was Thanksgiving night, and that's what it was all about. It was all about, eating dinner, sitting down in front of the TV, watching Texas A&M, one of the best rivalries in all of college football, and that went away. Obviously, the game went away, and next year they are playing on a Friday after Thanksgiving instead of on Thanksgiving. So Chris Del Conte has made it clear that he does want to play on Thanksgiving. He would like to move that game a day forward, not necessarily this upcoming year, but going forward. And I think that's something that Texas and Texas A&M fans can get behind, no doubt about it. Also, he said he wants to move the Oklahoma game to 3:30, which I'm not necessarily as big a fan of that. I love the entire setup of the Cotton Bowl as it is right now. But at the end of the day, the CBS 3:30 slot, keeping Texas OU out of that on that weekend is going to be pretty tough. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. And finally, he did say that he would like to play more in-state schools. So obviously, A&M would hopefully be on the schedule every single year, and that's what he hopes as well. But also, he wants to schedule teams like Texas Tech, TCU, possibly even an SMU team that is making the jump to the ACC next year. So I think that's a huge deal for not only Texas fans, because you love playing Texas Tech, you love playing TCU, you love playing Baylor, those teams that are a drive from you, but also just huge news for Texas Tech, for TCU. They hate Texas. There's no secret about that. They hate Texas and Oklahoma, and they really want to play those teams because every time you play them, you get a chance to make a big statement. So I think there is a ton to look forward to, not only in the SEC as a whole going forward, but if you are a Texas fan, I mean, there's a ton of little nuggets there that I'm sure you really enjoyed. And Chris Del Conte continues to be a very impressive athletic director and, keep Texas moving in the right direction. I think the 9-game SEC schedule, along with all the other things that he somewhat promised throughout this town hall, I think will be a huge part of that. But we are going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the media deal between the College Football Playoff and ESPN, and some ESPN, Fox, Warner Bros., all those people teaming up for a possible streaming service. So stay tuned. We will be right back.